Yes, and so we are live. This is great.
Great.
So,
Hi,
hi everyone. Good day for anyone that is joining us here. And today in our hallway tracks, we have Sofia Zab. And today we'll be looking at the case study on scaling startups. So, here, thank you for joining us if you're joining us. This is the Africathon, the Pan African Hackathon event, and we are pleased to have Sophia here with us. Yeah, so Sophia can give us a brief introduction so that we can get to know her better and move on. Yeah.
great. Hi, Andrew. Hi, everyone. Hi, guys. So thanks for that intro. My name is Sofia Zab, and it's actually such a pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to speak with you during this hackathon and to share my knowledge. It's especially great for me because when I first started out in the startup industry, I actually attended a lot of hackathons myself. And it's what inspired me to build a career in this industry, actually, like having that energy. So I hope that you're having a great time and that you'll find the speech helpful. So before I start with the topic, which is scaling startups, I'd like to just go through some information about me and some background about me, because I'll essentially be drawing on those experiences. So is my screen visible already, or can we share that now? Great, thank you. So I've been working for startups in Africa for about 6 years now at senior levels, and I started my career in London in online marketing, but I've always been very passionate about global issues and emerging markets. So at that time, Rocket Internet was the company that was working the most in emerging markets, and I applied and they gave me a job as the head of marketing for Jumia in Kenya. It's a brand I'm sure many of you have heard about. When I joined, it was still in the very beginning stages. It was in 2014. So I really got to experience the growth of that brand from a small startup to, like growing to the #1 spot of Alexa in Kenya. So it was like a 10x growth in revenue in a year. And that experience really set me up to become a leader in this space. And the second role that I had in Africa was as the global director of marketing for Branch. So at Jumia, I just focused on Kenya, but then a Branch is a San Francisco-based company. So I was part of that central team, but then we were operating in Kenya, Tanzania, and Nigeria. So I started to take a wider role. And then most recently and today, I'm working for PalmPay, which is a company that's owned by Mobile, and it's a payments company. So in the same way that Apple is doing Apple Pay and Google is doing Android Pay, Techno wants to do PalmPay, but we're also an independent company that's kind of doing our own thing. So I'm technically based in London. I travel about 90% of my time, and we have a central office in China. And our main market at the moment is Nigeria. We're also operating in Ghana, and there's 3 or 4 other markets that we're looking to open up this year. So I'm not African, but I have some experience on this continent, and I hope to share that with you. So you can go to the next slide. Just to kind of introduce PalmPay to you a little bit, which is the company that I'm working on right now. Is it me that controls the slides, or is it you, Andrew?
Yeah, I can see the controls the slide now. Yeah,
Okay. Let me
awesome.
just go back to... Right. So can we just focus on the slides going forward? So about PalmPay, basically PalmPay is a payments company, and our goal and the way that we're growing, really our USP, is to be the payments app that rewards you for your financial lifestyle. There's a lot of banks and telcos right now that kind of make their money by charging the customer for every little thing, including just account maintenance fee, card maintenance fee, that kind of thing. But we are rewarding customers with the loyalty point scheme that we have Palm Points, and we're making our money on the supply side instead. So we're basically aiming to grow as quickly as we can and then negotiate better prices for our customers. And the approach that we have as a company is to build an ecosystem. So there's certain things that we're building ourselves, but there's also use cases that we work with other companies with, and they can offer their services on the PalmPay app or via the PalmPay ecosystem. And the reason that we're really able to dream this big is because Techno is supporting us. So they've invested in us. We've raised $40 million in our first round with them. And then part of that partnership is that PalmPay will come pre-installed on 20 million phones throughout Africa this year and more next year and going forward. So for all of you that are building a startup and a technology startup, if you think that this is a good fit for you, feel free to reach out, because there may actually be an opportunity that we can work together. So moving on to the actual topic of the talk, scaling startups. I guess I've been given this topic by the organizers because I've kind of worked for these high growth startups and taken them from the early stage to the growth stage. So let's just start by defining what a startup actually is. So I always like Steve Blank's definition. He's like a thought leader in this industry. He defines a startup as a temporary organization designed to search for a scalable and repeatable business model. And so you can already see that based on his definition, a startup is unlike any normal company. It's not a restaurant. It's like an SMB, a normal SMB. It's not like a corporate like P&G. We're still trying to figure out and to design the business model to find out who our customers are and to really grow. So that also means that the kind of people that will thrive and succeed in this environment are not the same kind of people necessarily that you would hire elsewhere. We'll also touch on that in a bit. But I kind of wanted to zoom in a little bit more into this difference between an early stage startup and a growth stage startup. A growth stage, I guess, is the scaling part of it. It's really important that you focus on the right things for each stage of your startup, and that you actually are intentional about preparing for the transition between the two, because that's how you can really be successful at scaling them. So if you're running an early stage startup, your main priority will be to launch a minimum viable product in the market. Just launch something, like fail fast, as they say, and then iterate, build, measure, learn, try different things until you hit product market fit. That's a lot of jargon that I've just mentioned. If you don't know any of these terms, do Google them, because there's a lot of very good literature around that can help you in your journey. So the other thing that you're trying to do when you're in an early stage is to find your ideal customer profile. Like, what is the customer profile that will get you to that growth, that will get you to the revenue to make your business sustainable? It may be the same as your early adopters, or maybe a different profile from your early adopters, but at that early stage, you're really trying to please and to find your early adopters. So the kinds of customers that you're serving might also shift between the two stages, actually. And then when you're at an early stage, you're really doing things that don't scale. So you're trying to figure out as fast as possible and iterate through experiments what the eventual business model is going to be that's going to get you to that high growth stage. And sometimes that means that you can't invest the resources or time required to automate something or to do it perfectly, but you need to run your experiments in a very manual way. So like, let's say you're building a startup that does music recommendation. Rather than building a machine learning engine as the first step, you might actually want to recommend, get in touch with your users yourself and then recommend music to them and pretend that it's a machine doing it. But like, those are some of the tricks that you can employ to try and figure out what the actual business model that's going to be effective is going to be. Then once you are reaching your growth stage, the focus of the company and of the team will shift. So here it's actually going to be important for you to systematize your business model. So you're going to be focusing more on efficiency. You're going to build processes. You may be hiring hundreds of people in a very short space of time to try and meet the demand that's suddenly flowing in. And it almost seems like everything is chaotic and you can't grow fast enough. So if that's what it feels like, you're likely in the growth stage. And I think it's at that point very important for you to focus on automation and on scaling and on efficiency, because you want to make sure also that you please the investors at each stage, and investors look for different things at different stages. So at an early stage, they might look for the right kind of team of individuals, but then at the growth stage, they'd be much more in the numbers. So you have to make sure that you're shifting that focus and you can keep up. So I'm moving on now to the lessons learned and the tips. So I've kind of grouped them into 3 different categories, but really I'll be touching on a lot of things here. And I don't have a lot of time, so I can't cover everything, but I decided to focus mainly on the things that I found most important and that I believe every early to growth stage founder should know. And a lot of it is based on my own experience and lessons that I've learned. So the most important thing that I would say you need to start with is make sure that you're building the right team for the stage of the business that you're in. And your role as a founder is very likely to shift as well as your business is growing, because the one constant that's hopefully going to be there, even if your employees are leaving or joining, is you as a founder. So you will probably experience a lot of growth in your role. So at the early stage, obviously, you may not even have funding, or you might have a small angel round. So you generally don't start the way that we did at PalmPay, which is to hire lots of people straight off the bat. You know, you're going to have a small team of co-founders and maybe a few support staff. So it's really important that you pick your co-founders well, and that together you can cover the main areas of the business. That's why people say it's useful for you to have a commercial co-founder and a technical co-founder, so you can complement each other. And between you and that early stage team, you'll end up doing most things yourself. So I also recommend that you actually do that, because it really helps you understand your business on a deeper level. It helps you with fundraising. It helps you grow the business. You don't want to create a business and then the first thing that you do is hire Gilby to come up with the product and marketing strategy for you. You know, like, this is something that you need to live and breathe. And then as you transition to a stage where you need to hire more people and build out the different functions of your business, like in the beginning, you might be focusing mainly on product, but then now that you have customers, you may want more customers. So you'll probably start hiring marketing people. So I would say at this stage, this is where a lot of founders make a mistake and keep trying to have that wide pyramid where there's like a few senior people and like lots of junior people. I would at this stage actually bring more very senior people on board. And I would say, like, don't cheap out and get true experience into the business. Like, who you get on board will largely depend on your own background and expertise. So at Branch, for example, most of the founding team had a technical background. So the first senior person that they brought on board was myself as the head of marketing. That's something that they didn't know a lot about. And at the time, I was the first post-Series A hire. I was very expensive for them and almost like too experienced for the role. But they made that decision consciously because they could actually trust that they could delegate the thinking about how to build out that function and that team to me. And obviously they were still involved in all the nitty-gritty because it was still a very small team, but you want to start finding those senior people that you can eventually delegate to and that can help you build the organization out at this stage. If you can't afford a very senior functional leader at that point, one of the ways that you can hack this is getting consultants in. So that's one of the things that we did at PalmPay. Obviously, PalmPay was kind of incubated via Transsion, and ex-Transsion employees raised the funding from Transsion. They had that connection. So they didn't have a lot of experience on the payment side. And my boss, who's now the CEO of PalmPay, was hired first as a consultant, and then I hired more consultants to develop the technical plan for the infrastructure, and then they kind of replaced those consultants with employees that kept it going. So that's a way that you can, you know, get a very high quality person in, maybe just get them in for 3 to 6 months to put in place the right structure, and then have them replace themselves with more junior employees. But just make sure that during that transition stage, you make sure to build the right foundation, because it's always more difficult to come back and try to redo things. In terms of the actual employees that you hire at that stage, I would almost go the other way. So rather than hiring very specialized experienced people, I think things at that transition stage will be so chaotic, and you may not even, you may be doing a lot of pivoting. You may not even know exactly what the company will look like in a year's time. So I always prefer at that stage to hire people based on aptitude and personality. And, there's a certain kind of personality that will really thrive in a startup. People that are happy wearing many hats, that are really hungry for growth, people that are smart, people that are self-directed learners, that don't necessarily need structure and routine. I'm sure you can imagine someone in your life that fits that bill, and another person that's a different type of person. So make sure you're hiring for the right kind of person, and then it'll become apparent as they grow whether they want to become a manager, or whether they want to kind of start specializing, because you can't be wearing many hats forever. But I would kind of focus on multifunctional employees at that point. And then once you really enter that growth stage, that's when you would start to look for the best in terms of specialized skill sets. So try to find, a social media manager, and then a separate online marketing manager, different types of engineers, different like product manager versus engineer. And as a founder, you would then start zooming out in terms of your role. And I think getting it right when it comes to how much to zoom out and when to zoom out is really crucial, and you have to have a feel for it. You don't want to be the founder that's like trying to raise for Series A and you don't know what the cost per acquisition is for your product because you've delegated all of that to the marketing manager and you're looking at other things. Like, you need to really be in the details yourself. And I think that's one of the things that we did really well with Jumia. We had a lot of alignment and a lot of even the MD would be very aware of all the different areas of the business. I remember my boss at the time, once a week, she would spend a couple of hours sitting with the customer service team and actually answering calls. I didn't see that in any other business that I've worked for, but I really admired that, because that means that not only did she boost the morale of people, but she was actually really aware of what the customer issues were, and she could then feed that back into the management team and project manage the correct things. So we're kind of already talking about the next thing now, which is the next area is kind of around communication and alignment. I think that's one of those things that comes very easily to you at an early stage of the business because you're a small team. Most of the time, co-founders actually end up living together. You're going to live and breathe the business and probably not really have a life. So you're going to be communicating all the time anyway. But when you're in that transition stage, as more people join, you have to become much more intentional about communicating with people and also building alignment between different functions that are now developing. So that's where company culture really comes handy, and building tools, building processes and using tools. So in terms of company culture, I would align on that very early on. I think that's one of the things we did really well at both Jumia and Branch. It was very obvious what like a typical Branch employee or typical Jumia employee was. And that's because it came from the top. And at Branch, we had like 3 different culture principles. They were driven by data, serving the customer, and fearless in the face of barriers. Like, I still remember that. And they'll ask that in the interview for every employee that joins, because they wanted that culture to be there, even when the founders couldn't personally be there to put it into place. And at Jumia, I think the culture, we didn't really have it all written down, but it all revolved around the concept of taking ownership. And if you see a problem, you have to take ownership of it, make sure you solve it, make sure that you don't take this corporate mindset that you've handed it over to the next guy in the chain. No, you have to babysit it throughout the process. So that was like a core principle of the Jumia culture that is still part of how I run things, actually. So this is something I would take time to develop. It's not a nice to have or a fluffy thing. And then in the beginning of the company, you might have processes that are kind of daily. So you might be doing daily stand-ups with the entire team. But then as the team grows, your processes need to change as well. So there's 2 kind of things that I really recommend. One is to have a whole company dashboard that every person has a place in. So many different functions could be contributing to the cost of acquisition, which is the CPA, essentially. Like, obviously the marketing department spends the money, but then the product needs to make sure that the conversion rate works. The customer service team needs to make sure that customers don't drop off because they don't understand the product. So having those core metrics that the whole company actually looks at on a weekly basis is really important, and it also helps motivate the team and make everyone feel like they're important and they're aligned. And then as you're breaking down the different functions, I would also start doing functional meetings. So the product team could be having a meeting every month that talks about the product roadmap. The marketing team could be talking about their metrics. And then I would actually err on the side of more transparency. So try to open these meetings up to everyone that feels interested or that feels like they're relevant to attend. Even people outside of marketing should be free to join the marketing meeting, in my opinion. And that's also how you can identify people and nurture them for internal promotions, right? If you allow them to be part of wider conversations. So I find it really useful to use tools to help with that. My two favorite tools are Slack and Google Drive. I think if you have Slack and Google Drive, you can really you can kind of really make sure that your company grows well from the very early stages up until a late stage. And the reason I love Slack is because it kind of takes away the responsibility from the person that's organizing the group to make sure that everyone that needs to be there is there. Like, you can create different channels and then people can self-assign themselves to the channels, and you can make the channels as granular as you want to, and then it's up to each person to keep themselves informed. So a lot of the politics is removed and a lot of the admin is removed if you're using Slack for communication. And then for Google Drive, it's just a really good way to share documents and co-work together on presentations, on dashboards and things like that. So I recommend that you set those up from the beginning. And then as you're entering the growth stage, it's as I said before, as a founder, you'll start zooming out, but it's still really important that you do keep communicating with the company. So you might not be able to say hi to everyone in the team, but even if you just do like a 15-minute all hands with company updates once a week, or you send a company newsletter from the founder, it helps with morale and helps everyone feel aligned. And just because you and your senior team know what's going on doesn't mean that you can assume that everyone else is automatically carried on as well. So that's also part of your responsibility as a founder to make that happen throughout all stages of the business. And part of you building a company culture, I believe, should be you building in rituals into your business. So these rituals can include things like the all hands that I just spoke about. It could be making sure that everyone that has a birthday gets a cake. Or I remember at one of my previous companies in London, every week during the all hands, we had this like box where you could write anonymous well done messages to your colleagues, and then the founder would read all of them, and then you would hear like your name being praised for something that you did that maybe you didn't even realize anyone noticed. But it was like a great ritual, a great pick-me-up, and it was core to the company culture. Getting people drunk always works, like Friday drinks. Invest in that, because when you're at the growth stage, you'll be at the, like, you may find yourself in a position where people don't really know each other anymore. You have so many new people joining. You may have hundreds of people in a company, and employee retention may decrease as well, because for some people the chaos will get too much. So you want to make sure that people can integrate themselves in the company well without too much hand-holding, and having a clear culture really helps with that. Then the other thing that I would start doing when you're entering the growth stage is something called OKRs, which is like a performance management system that was I think either developed or used by Google, and it stands for Objectives and Key Results. And it's basically a way to make sure that everyone's KPIs and tasks and goals are aligned, starting with the whole company, and then the team, and then each individual on each team. So the leadership team would develop like the 6 key objectives, and those 6 key objectives, or however many you have, would be shared between all the teams and between all the individuals. And then it's up to you to develop your key results and your KPIs to try and meet those objectives. And that's really invaluable to keep people aligned and kind of reduce internal competition and politics, because you're all essentially working towards the same goal, and this just makes that much clearer. So make sure that you're intentional about building in these cultures, these processes and tools. And then the final section is around growth hacking and positive PR. So don't underestimate the power of it. I think there could be a tendency, if you're really focused on making your business work, to in the early stage, be very internally facing and kind of just try and focus on the 100 customers you have, or build out different marketing channels and test different things. But I think that there is a value in you actually pursuing PR, pursuing partnerships for its own sake. Try and speak at conferences, try and apply for accelerators, try and apply for competitions, make friends with journalists, and if you need to, pay for a PR consultant so you can get into the papers. Because there's a lot about building a startup is making you, or it's kind of, there's serendipities that arise that you may not be able to have planned for. And so you need to really get yourself out there. You don't know whether that conference speech that you did had an investor present that ends up leading your next round. You don't know whether a partner that you've been dreaming about reads about you on TechCrunch and they think that you're a big deal now and they'll actually reach out to you. Like, all of these things have happened to me and the startups that I've worked for. So make sure that you do take care of the image of your business and build that PR intentionally. And then in terms of growth hacking, as an early stage business, you may not really have the budget to invest in marketing, but an easy way that you can get a lot of customers fast is by leveraging the audience that other people have. So that could be working with celebrities and influencers and getting them to plug your product to their Twitter audience or their social media audience, or it could be working with partners and getting them on board, maybe knowing that they have a bigger brand than yours and that can rub off on you, even if you don't see the commercial potential as being that high, or the other way around, right? Where you know they have a very, very big audience, and if they were to plug your brand to their mailing list, it could really be a life changer. So try and research what companies your company could partner with. Like, we're doing that at PalmPay, for example. We're building out an ecosystem. And then you don't need to do everything yourself. I think you're stronger in numbers, and it'll actually make you look better if you're aligned with all these different brands. And then one other thing that I would recommend every startup figures out how to do is leverage your customer base and try and use them to make your product go viral. Like, build a referral program. The one we have on PalmPay is that you can have your own, you can develop your own code, or like, as a user, you can access your code or a link to share to your friends, and they can download the app via that. And then once they download the app, you get $1 and they get $1. And like, $1 is a lot of money in some African countries. So we have people at PalmPay that are doing this full time. If you search for PalmPay on YouTube, you'll actually find that the majority of videos are random customers explaining the app to each other because they want that referral program money. So you really want to build that positive word of mouth and turn your customers into your own marketing channel. Make sure that your product goes viral that way. If, you know, I think it's always a bad sign if you're what we call a leaky bucket. Like, if you suddenly had some problem and you had to switch off your paid marketing completely and then your growth stops, that's actually a bad sign. So try and figure out a way that word of mouth is what grows your product the most. Okay, I think I've actually gone through all my content. I'm conscious of time. I know I'm already 5 minutes over. So I don't know if we really have time for questions. Andrew, you can let me know. But in any case, I'm trying to build my Twitter audience. So please follow me at Sofia Zab, and feel free to share any questions or insights, or even if you disagree.
Okay, yeah, I see. I am the following. I'm already a follower, so that's a good thing.
Awesome, great to hear.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that was very insightful. You did leave some keynotes from the presentation. I think one of the very important stuff was in breaking down what you do when you're an early stage versus what you do when you're a growth stage, right? because a lot of individuals don't really understand this. When you are at early stage, it's more about finding product market fit. You want to get your MVP out as soon as possible, right? You want to build and test with the users as soon as possible. And I think one very amazing information you shared with us is identifying the ideal customer profile. Because well, from what I know, identifying the right customer profile would enable you to target them even better. And maybe you could share with us how you can define your customer profile for most of the individuals here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And, most of the time it's like a eureka moment. You might find out that your ideal customer profile is not the one that you thought it would be when you started off. So I remember the growth story of Pinterest, actually. They thought Pinterest, with the founders, when they first developed it, they thought it would be used mainly by like tech bros to pin different articles and things like that. And then they found out it was actually mothers that were pinning recipes and like things about how to improve their home and lifestyle. And at that
Okay.
time, that segment wasn't really even online. So they just happened upon it. So I think the best way that you can really try and identify your ideal customer segment is run lots of experiments, like really follow this build, measure, learn philosophy and allocate your budget towards testing different things and then double down on what works. And just try and be as scientific about it as possible. So actually follow a scientific method, like draw up your hypothesis and the results that you would want to see, and then if you're doing a Facebook ad or an SMS or any kind of measurable activity, make sure that you have a control group and then the group of people that you're actually sending the communications out to, and then analyze it and see what the uplift is. So it's try and be like more scientific and less emotional about it, and be open to the possibility that your ideal customer segment is not the one you thought it would be, or that it could even be different from your early adopters. And then the second point I would mention on that question is that different types of personalities make decisions about adopting products differently. So the majority of people, I think, are pretty risk averse, and especially in the space that we're in, which is the financial space, they don't really want to try an app unless they know their friends are using it, or unless they know we have some certification or regulated, or there's some social proof out there already. So you may need to actually focus on different types of customers throughout the life stage of your business. Like in the beginning, make sure that you're building out those early adopters, even if you know you're going to grow beyond them, because you need them so that their data can serve as a proving point for the majority that may be a more valuable customer segment for you at a later stage. And if you want to learn more about this, I recommend a YouTube talk by Simon Sinek called Start With Why. And he goes into that a little bit as well. Does anyone else have any other questions? Thank you for that, Andrew.
You're welcome. Yeah, I think you mentioned Simon Sinek starts with why.
Yes.
That's a TED talk, right?
Yeah, it's a tech talk. I mean, he's actually talking, he mentions this part about crossing the chasm. He's talking about how to move from the early adopters to the early majority. And in between, there might be a chasm where as you're shifting and as you're in that transition phase, you might have to lose some customers to gain a more valuable customer type. But the majority of the talk is actually about how companies approach branding, and that the most successful companies are not the ones that talk about what they do, like, oh, we do airtime and bill payments and whatever, but they're talking about why they do it. Like, we want to help people improve their lives through access to the best financial services in the market. Like, talk about the vision that you have and make that the main thing in your communication about your company. Because the way the human brain works is that people align with the why. And then he basically said that you could, as long as you get people to buy into your why, you could sell almost anything to them. And that's why Apple, for example, has been successful in selling an iPhone and releasing like a music player and all these different things, even though they started off as a computer company. But meanwhile, some other companies that took a more traditional approach, like even Microsoft, for example, they released tablets way before Apple did, and it totally bombed, you know, because they were much more functional in their communication. So I recommend the platform. It's a great one.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. So we have a question here from Bill, and he's asking, "Thanks for the presentation, Sophia. You said at the early stage we should do most of the work. I would like you to enlighten us more about that." Yeah. So thank you, Bill, for the question. So
Sure. So I was part of two early stage companies, very early stage companies, and this PalmPay actually, I was one of the first employees before we even had a product, before we even had a license, and you know the title that I have sounds very important, Global Head of Commercial and Marketing. But what I was doing in the beginning is I was wearing so many hats. I was basically like the CEO can also stand for Chief Everything Officer. So you have to kind of learn how to execute the business yourself before you hire people to delegate that part to. So if you are building a consumer product, and you have a technical founder and a commercial co-founder, I would recommend that the commercial co-founder actually sets up the Facebook page themselves, like does some customer service yourself. And I think when you're doing your experiments, sometimes you might come across a very successful one, which may require you to do a lot yourself in order to be able to fulfill that sudden demand that came along. So if you're shipping things, then maybe you'll end up writing lots of thank you notes yourself and packaging the product yourself as the CEO. And then you realize, okay, I need to really hire that person and do that for me. But like in terms of hiring new people, I would always be led by what has become overwhelming for you to manage yourself, rather than preemptively hire all these people and you don't really even understand what job they're doing. Like make sure that you really understand that job first and then hire out. And if there's an area you don't understand, then to talk to your friends, hire consultants, but educate yourself in the core of your business. Because as a founder, your most important job, as well as growing the company, will be raising funding for the company. And investors at an early stage ask a lot of nitty-gritty questions, and they like to see that you're in the details.
okay, yeah, that was pretty thorough. Thank you for that answer. And so one more question before we go. This is Suleiman, and he's asking, from your experience in different startups, what has been the best way to build a culture in a company?
So that's a really great question. And I don't in any way profess to be an expert in that, because I think that building a culture is one of the most difficult things you can do. And we haven't always gotten it right in the companies I've worked for. So I have lessons both from like what we did wrong or didn't do and the things we did well. But if I could recommend some approaches to you, it's sit down, maybe look at Netflix's culture deck. If you Google Netflix culture deck, you can see that they have a huge document where they kind of wrote down the behaviors that they want to see among team members. And I would workshop it, have a conversation with your co-founders and think about things you liked and disliked about the company cultures of companies that you've been part of, and just brainstorm about it. And I think if you're working together well, you basically align on a few core principles and then take it from there. So the first thing will be for you to kind of draft out what the culture should be, what the behavior should be. And then the second thing will be build rituals in the company that reinforce that culture. So if your culture is that everyone in the company should be friendly with each other and it should have like a family kind of feeling, then a natural ritual you could build is that you all go out for drinks on a Friday and like it's compulsory, or that you have like at Y Plan, one of the things we did is like every Wednesday afternoon, someone had to give a speech about something completely outside of work, but something that they're passionate about. And that way you get to know them as a person as well. If your culture principle is that you want everyone to be super data driven, then build a ritual that everyone has to look at the dashboard together every day, So I think rituals is what reinforces the culture. And then also make sure that when you're hiring, you're including questions in the interviews that speak about the culture as well.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Yes, I think that's an amazing answer because one, you have to reinforce the culture, and you have to find ways to reinforce it, right? And in the hiring process as well, you have to integrate that so that the individuals who are joining your company at whatever stage it is are also individuals who can imbibe that culture. They can get immersed in that culture and they can make the best out of it, right? Okay, so maybe we take one more question, and so this is Elvis, and he says, "Can a tech startup build different apps at the same time?" Um, Generally speaking, yeah. So you can take this. You can try this.
This is a very interesting question. I think unless your business model is to build different apps, I wouldn't start
Exactly.
that way. I would like do one thing, do it well before you move on to the another thing, because what you don't want is for your attention to be split from the start. So you kind of want to make sure that you babysit the baby until it can walk before you have another one.
Awesome, awesome. And I think this is almost the same question that Bill is asking here. How do we manage when we have more than one startup we are working on? Should we focus on one as
Yeah.
well?
So a friend of mine has just been through Y Combinator actually, and she said that one of the things that they were taught is, you have time to do a startup and one other thing in your life at the early stage. So like that other thing could be your family. If you don't have a family yet, like maybe you can do another startup, right? But like I don't see a reason unless you're trying to be in the early stage of two startups at once and kind of iterate. If you're like an engineer yourself and you can build the app yourself and you can test different apps by yourself, maybe that's a way for you to validate which startup to put more attention into. So that would be like the very, very early stage. But otherwise, if it's anything involving a team, if it's gotten to that stage, I would focus on one.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. Sorry to keep you waiting, but I think this was a really great session, and I think we have learned so much from your experience and from your expertise. We're hoping that some other time we'll also have the opportunity to host you for a session like where you can get to share your experience with the rest of the participants and with other individuals across Africa. And we were pleased to have you. So happy hacking to our hackathon individuals, and we'll be coming back with more of the hallway tracks with our industry leads. So thank you so much, Sophia. It was a pleasure to have you. And so bye, everyone.
Bye.
Okay.